Hi, everyone. As Glenn said, I think I'm going to be a little bit of a departure from our other speakers. I'm a market intelligence manager at immixGroup. We are Arrow's public sector arm. So we have a pretty unique capability, I think, at immixGroup. Since it is, federal market intelligence, we're breaking down everything for IT organizations, budgets, programs, and we break that down for our partners and suppliers in a way that makes it actionable for them. So I'm going to talk about some of the market intelligence things that we've done. I'm also going to spend a lot of my time talking about analytics projects as they relate to market intelligence. Just from sitting in the workshop the other day, I was in the data intelligence workshop group. I heard a lot that relates from my industry to your industry. So I think there'll be a decent amount of overlap. But basically, I'm hoping to, since I'm kind of coming in this with an outsider's perspective, I'm hoping to maybe you guys can think about looking at your data with a different kind of perspective. Think about your information gathering processes and some of the questions that you're asking. So that is my goal, hopefully, this afternoon. So kind of just wanted to set the stage with what is market intelligence. I think some people consider it to be different things. So up here, I have a lot of the inputs that would go into making a market intelligence deliverable for us at immixGroup. So it's really just internal and external pieces of information, information that you're using to make informed decisions about your business, right? A lot of it is just stuff that you know from doing your job every day. So none of this is really news to us, but from working in this industry, which I've been in for about the past 10 years, I think what people struggle the most with is really understanding how to bring all this information together to impact your bottom line. Understanding, what pieces of information they need to concentrate on, how can you trust the information, and how do you bring it all together in a way that's impactful, that lets you see the bigger picture of what your customer's trying to do. So these are all of the inputs that would go into market intelligence. So I also wanted to list a list of outputs to try to kind of get you thinking about things that you could do just with information that's going to help you impact your bottom line. I think from listening to everyone at FOM so far, I think maybe one of the differences between immixGroup's market intelligence, we strive to be very revenue generating. For you guys, it might be more about cost avoidance. But you guys can let me know after. But it can impact your bottom line one way or another. So one thing that I was told about this audience in getting ready for the presentation is that a lot of you guys are in the aerospace and defense market. Can I do a quick audience poll? I looked at the registration list. I feel confident with that assumption, but I just like to double check and see who we've got. And I would keep my hand up as well, too. I think that's part of the reason why immix is participating in this event. We have a lot of the same end customers as Converge in aerospace and defense. So I'm going to be using some aerospace and defense type examples. Also, since immix got acquired by Arrow in 2015, we've gotten pulled into some larger aerospace and defense projects. So I'm going to talk about one of those as an example, kind of how you can use analytics in a broader sense. And this is not meant to alienate anyone else that's not in aerospace and defense. I'm going to hopefully bring it back around at the end. Because to me, and what I want to try to talk about with this presentation is really market intelligence is about answering questions about your customers, regardless of what type of customer it is, and coming up with a repeatable methodology that you can use. You might have to tweak it based on the information that's available, but really you're coming up with a methodology to answer these types of questions. So I am going to start with an aerospace and defense example, but I think everyone will relate to it. So if you work in the aerospace and defense industry, you might have seen this. This is something that happened earlier over the summer when I was starting to put together research for this presentation. I was like, oh, this is definitely going in the brief. I think it's the only presentation I'll ever give where I talk about toilets, but you never know. I never knew I was going to be at this conference either. This happened earlier over the summer, and I think it kind of highlights the problem of parts obsolescence. This report came out, the Air Force got in trouble. It came out they were spending $10,000 every time they needed to replace a toilet seat cover on this C-5 Galaxy aircraft, which dates back to the late 1960s. I know we've been talking about aircraft a little bit today, so this is another example of it, but just a different kind of part. And in this case, they were saved by 3D printing. So I think they got lucky. That's not going to work for the types of components and parts that we're selling. But I just wanted to make the point that this is something that's happening every day and across every type of industry. There's always a pressure between dedicating money to sustaining something new, or when do you need to spend it on newer parts. So how can you use market intelligence to try and help your customer avoid this kind of situation? So instead of spending a lot of time talking about the traditional market intelligence that immixGroup is doing, because that's a little bit more manual, I'm happy to talk about it in Q&A, or if you want to grab me after, I'm happy to talk about it then. But I think where this audience is going to be the most impactful would be with applying analytics. And that's something that I think you guys have been talking about in the workshop as well. But I thought this would be more attractive to you guys, and I'm going to talk about one big project that we're doing with analytics. But you're basically, if you're just starting with data, you're kind of moving up the chain. The more advanced capabilities you're getting, the more automation you're able to apply. So I also heard this audience is, a lot of independent problem solvers. So I was hoping that that would be something that would be attractive to you guys. In terms of analytics efforts, I'm going to now start talking about some of the projects that we're working on at immixGroup. I think they've been very well worth our time. The first one that we started was a project looking at our install base data. This is data that we already had just sitting around. And from some install base campaigns, kind of looking at it proactively, we were able to generate about $5 million worth of revenue. And this is just the first year of this project. So we were able to realize our data can be very valuable. So I just want you guys to be thinking along the same lines that if you're not thinking about your data as an asset, you could be running the risk of either leaving money on the table or not saving enough money, if it's your case. So say you do want to start an analytics project. These are some of the kind of questions that you might want to ask yourself. It's always important to begin an analytics project with the outcome in mind. It's really easy to get distracted from that, so you need to define that from the very beginning. Talking about what kind of data you have. Hopefully you have access to all of your own internal data, but it's really important to kind of think about who is inputting information into your point of sales records. Are there questions that they could be asking but currently aren't? I think for an aerospace and defense type of example, the biggest example of that would be, your customer might be working on a subcomponent of a subcomponent, but ultimately it's going to roll up to a larger weapons system. So if you're able to figure that out, then you can leverage all the publicly available information about that weapons system. You can find out who the subcontractors are. You can find out what's going on in the news. It's going to help you get a broader sense of what your customer is hoping to do. Also think about your data capturing process. One of the bullet points I had up on my first slide of market intelligence inputs was tribal information. So that's something that's often the most valuable piece of a customer engagement. That's direct from the customer. If you're the person that's getting that yourself, that's great. But if you're not, I bet you want that information. So you can think about maybe there are ways that you can better share that information. And then you can also think about, if you're coming up with ideas for analytics projects that you want to do, if you have some expertise, if you have access to the data that you think you're going to need for it, maybe the project can begin and end with yourself. But you might also want to think about getting outside help. That's what we're going to do for our larger analytics effort. Yeah. So if you're getting into starting an analytics project, let's talk about some of the challenges that you might experience. And I say these challenges, this work can be very challenging. I think it's important to, with analytics projects, it's important to start small and do something with resources that you already have in place. That's why I mentioned that install base example. That helped us realize the value of our data. It helped us develop some confidence and feel fueled like we could keep going. I think it's important to do that to get also in the mindset of data analytics, just because it does get challenging. So I'm going to talk about some challenges, but also some ways you can mitigate those. So dirty data. I'm going to tell my dirty data story in a minute, but you know, I think it's the #1 threat to the success of any analytics project. If you have horrible data, it's not worth doing anything with it. You're not going to get anything out of it. It's a waste of your time. So with, back to my story, so at immixGroup, when we started looking at analytics efforts a couple years ago, ultimately what we want to be able to do is predict what our customers are going to buy next. By looking at what they've purchased in the past, then the idea is to get to them and sell them something before they maybe even they think they need it or they know they need it. So in order to begin this project, I started looking back at our customer data over, you know, maybe 3 or 4 years worth of transactions. And I had no idea how difficult it was going to be to actually determine who the end user customers are. Just the way that our system was set up, people input into different fields who they think the end user customer are, but you know, everyone's touching it at a different point throughout the sale. So in cleaning it up, I would look at, you know, I would look across 5 different data points, try to decipher, you know, who's actually the end user customer. It gets especially difficult when it comes to Department of Defense customers. So analytics is really my side project. Most of the time I'm spending it on day-to-day market intelligence deliverables for our partners and suppliers. So all of the time that I was able to spend on analytics was going to data cleanup. And that's not that unusual for a data project. A good amount of time has to go into cleaning up the data and making sure that it's worth your time and that you're going to get what you need out of it. But all of my time was going to it, and I wasn't able to dedicate or to learn any new skills of what to do with it after, you know? So what we eventually did, we worked with our sales teams, with our IT teams, and had a lot of ideas. What we eventually settled on was just adding, we changed our process. So we added some new fields to our CRM system. It's actually kind of cool because it links back to a database that Market Intelligence owns and operates. So that gives us a little bit more control over the situation. This is not a perfect solution. I don't believe in perfect solutions, but it's probably cut my data cleanup time in half. So I'm very grateful, very happy with that. It requires a lot of training of sales teams, a lot of working across a lot of different groups. So I'm saying this story just because, you know, if you feel like there's more that you could be getting out of your data, questions that people that work on your sales teams could be asking, there's always a way that you can improve that. Normalization is another issue that you might run into. This is at least where we're going to bring in outside data experts for our project. This is when you be comparing different data sets. They may be describing the same thing or they may not, but how do you integrate those and use them for analysis? And then finally, more data is not always better data. I think if you're working with a data set, especially if you're fairly new into the world of analytics, if you're working with a data set, you feel like you can't trust it, you don't know what it really means, you're not sure what to do with it, honestly, I would take a step back and I would go work with data that either you have control over or that you trust better and that you trust you're going to get what you need out of it. Again, this kind of goes back to the idea of starting small and starting with accomplishable goals. Just work with what you can and then build up and gain confidence slowly. So now I'm going to talk about our cool Aero A&D example. So this is kind of something I was hoping it would get you guys thinking about, you know, what different data types we might be using. Maybe you can relate to it in your jobs. But basically, right now, Aero has a lot of companies that are selling to aerospace and defense type customers, but we've created information silos. We don't know what we're selling across different weapons systems programs. So the idea is to combine our internal transaction data. That's going to require a lot of data normalization across Aero's companies. Talk about DoD comptroller information, and then some third-party resources that's going to help augment what's going on with weapon systems from a larger perspective, like who all the subcontractors are, that kind of thing. So we want to take it, bring it all together. That's where we're going to need a lot of help from data science experts, probably some machine learning. And then some of the outputs that we're hoping to get out of it would be Margin optimization, that's something that's very near and dear to our hearts. Market basket analysis. So like I said, right now we're selling to these customers, but we don't know if these items are being paired or should be being paired together to increase sales. And then finally, a more advanced capability that we'd hope to get out of it would be generating auto quotes. So you can kind of see there's a lot of potential to really boost our bottom line here. And we're very excited about this because once we're able to figure out, the algorithms that we need, the data that we need, the normalization processes that we need, we're going to try and replicate it across other types of verticals. So this is where I'm hoping to bring it back into everyone, not just aerospace and defense. But you can use this kind of information to impact your bottom line. You can help your customers achieve data-driven supply chain by integrating all this data. If you can do it once, you can use that methodology and repeat it. Wrapping up. So I think it's important to, when you're working with analytics projects, to start small and grow and build from there. That's the best way not to overwhelm yourself. I think one of the reasons people do tend to get overwhelmed is because with analytics, really, the world, there are endless possibilities, right? So for that reason, it's very easy to feel overwhelmed. People want to walk away. I don't want that to happen to anyone here. Just so start small, get in the right mind frame to be doing data analytics, and then grow and build from there. Look at the questions that you're asking throughout your sales process. There may be valuable information that's being lost in the process, information silos. You could be sharing data better. And then finally, my biggest bullet point up here, I hope that I've convinced you that market intelligence can really be something that can impact your bottom line and help you be proactive, which is something that I've heard a lot throughout this conference. So thank you. Questions?
Any questions for Stephanie? Oops. We got one right here.
So at
hold it up
GE,
here.
We do a lot of analytics.
Okay.
The one thing I didn't notice is how do you correlate whatever your analytics come up with against results to see is the inference that you get accurate, correct? Did the data lead you in a direction that doesn't make sense? Can you talk to that?
Yeah, we've come across that sometimes when we're kind of trying to get like a market size for a particular technology. I think in that case, well, we would have to look at the data source that was different from ours, try to figure out if we could have more insight into the methodology that they used to get that number, then relook at the methodology that we used to get our number, double check and make sure that one of us isn't including something that shouldn't be included. If you don't have access to the methodology of the other number that's different from yours, and you're trying to reconcile it, yes, that can be very different or difficult. It would depend on kind of the source and if I knew historically that they could be trusted. I'd probably try to work with, if you have like an account rep there, just trying to get as much information as you can from them and figure out what the difference is. Yeah. Sorry.
Next question.
So what's been the biggest challenge for you in regards to getting clean data or cleaning the data up or keeping the data clean as it's updated with new inputs?
So it's having the fields that we added linked to the market intelligence database is really helpful because I can just create a new field anytime someone needs it. The biggest challenge is working with the sales teams, constantly educating them, reminding them, re-reminding them. It's a constant struggle in educating them as much as possible. That's been the hardest part, and they forget sometimes still. Yeah.
Another question? Let's give it up for Stephanie.